the food noise that's coming this time is not the same. The food noise isn't here because of the same trigger than the first time. Now it's different. Like it could be doing a different job. So it needs a different solution. Instead of saying, how do I make the food noise quiet? What I really want you asking yourself is like, what just opened up in my life? Hello and welcome back to another new episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped. I'm Alana Kessler. Today we're going to talk about food noise coming back. What happens when food noise comes back and what are we supposed to do with it? And what's interesting to me is that the women that I talk to who share with me that food noise comes back, these women most often are not actually in crisis. Right? They're not in a state in their life where something is emergent or something is wrong. They're usually in actually a really good place. They tell me that their life is good, their marriage is good, their job is good, nobody's sick. There's no fires to put out. And the confusing piece, and I think the part that, feels just so out of control is that for some reason, it feels like the noise about food, about eating, the feeling of urgency to run to the cabinets and to eat comes back. And this is especially, or happens, right? It either happens or it comes back. Coming back, meaning like if you've taken a GLP-1 or anything like that and you've stopped, that these things come back, but everything is actually good. I'm doing this episode because it's something that I've noticed for a while. And I feel like it doesn't fit the story that we usually tell ourselves about food noise, which is that food noise is a response to stress, right? To something stressful happens, old habits, they come back, you strong arm yourself through it, you feel like you failed. And I think that is the version, that's the storyline that people think when the food noise comes back. It's that like something bad leads to this coping mechanism and, we're kind of back in the cycle of using food to cope with stress. But that is actually not what I'm seeing, and that's not what I want to talk about today. What I'm talking about today when it relates to food noise showing up in your life is that it shows up randomly, seemingly randomly, like on a random Tuesday afternoon, right? On vacation, potentially. Maybe it's even like all of a sudden something amazing happened, like you had a big win in your life and it comes then, or when you have, you've been looking forward to things settling down, things calming down in your life, and all of a sudden the food noise is back, right? And it's like, I think that detail, the timing, is actually where the answer is. So I'll give you an example. A client of mine, I'll call her Rene, she was messaging me a few months ago and her message basically said, I don't get it. Nothing is wrong in my life. In fact, everything is great. Like I just got this great opportunity at work. I'm in such a great place with my husband. My kids are doing great in school, but I just feel like I cannot stop having these like constant thoughts about food. And I find myself wandering and meandering into the kitchen at night and just sort of like opening and closing cabinets or taking something out of the cabinet and snacking on it or grazing on it. And just like feeling like food is just taking up a massive amount of space in my brain. She was like feeling just negative and bad about herself because she's like, I feel like I'm back to where I was, a year ago, 2 years ago. She was like, I don't really get it because 2 years ago or however long it was, I could directly connect that eating behavior to this, stressful coping mechanism that was going on. But now nothing is wrong. Like I'm not coping with anything, right? Like there's nothing for me to cope with. And that's what confused her the most because she always had believed that food noise was like an alarm. That food noise was an alarm and it went off when something was wrong. That having food noise was directly correlated to needing to cope with something that was wrong, emotions that were wrong. So if the food noise came back, the immediate alarm bell that went off was like, something must be wrong. I just haven't found it yet. I don't, that I have that hypervigilance, right? That nervous system on edge. And, she kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but there was no shoe. And I think that we do that to ourselves so much because, we are so used to this story that we tell ourselves about food noise. And at first, I thought her situation might be unusual, but then I started speaking to some of my other clients, whether it was with my one-on-one clients or, women in my programs, the self-guided programs. They share things in their programs sometimes, and they were sharing similar versions of this. Right? I would hear a similar version over and over again, where people would say that food noise came back, not necessarily during an emotionally hard season, but after that, right? Or a season that wasn't even really emotionally difficult at all. And once I was able to connect the dots a little bit better, it all kind of started to, make sense to me. Because think about it, right? Think about what happens during an actual crisis, right? Like when we're actually having something emergent happening, right? Like when your kid's in the hospital, or you're buried under a deadline, your relationship's falling apart, your brain actually hyper focuses, right? It's not like having food noise, right? It's not obsessing over food. Usually it's fully busy. It's fully activated towards this one thing, and all your attention goes to that one thing. So there's not a lot of room left over for food noise, actually, right? Food noise needs empty space to show up in. And during an actual real emergency crisis, there is no empty space, right? That is full on fight or flight. That is survival, right? It's all being used somewhere else, right? I mean, I saw this happen with a woman that I was working with who's had her mom was sick for a while, right? And, every appointment she had to arrange, every phone call, everything she had to arrange, she was handling all of it. And during that whole stretch, right, where she was actually handling it and doing activities around it, she wasn't just ruminating on it, right? She was actually doing things that were taking her attention and behavior. She told me that food barely crossed her mind, right? She forgot to eat half the time, not because she was doing anything differently necessarily, but because of everything that she had, that was all the behavior, like I said, was going towards what was directly in front of her and making this happen. Then when her mom got better and there wasn't all of this stuff, these other things to do and to focus on, and things got quieter, she found herself having the food noise, and she found herself doing the wanting to do the late night overeating stuff, and it caught her completely off guard. And she also thought, something must be wrong, because why else would this be back, right? Like there must be some underlying thing wrong that I'm coping with emotionally or something. Otherwise, why would this be back? If you're looking at this, nothing was wrong. It's just something had opened up. Space had opened up. What's interesting when I thought about this more is in this scenario, like when food noise comes back, I don't necessarily think that it's stress. I think it could be the opposite. I think the stress ends up coming from like the lack of ability, the lack of nervous system capacity to deal with the space that arises when stress goes away, right? When suddenly you don't have to hyper focus your attention on something that needs immediate fixing. And so what happens is when you train your nervous system to be in this, when you train your nervous system, or when food noise goes away because it's being replaced by some emergency that's putting your nervous system into fight or flight, or like this hyper focused, hyper vigilant stuff to get things done, and then that thing goes away, food noise rushes to fill it. And this is why people self-sabotage, right? This is why people create problems so they could fix the problems, because fixing problems gives your brain a place to put the attention. And so when your brain has a place to put the attention, there's not as much space for food noise to come in. And if you think about it, we don't build our lives with that much empty time in them, especially these days, right? There's always something else to fill the time. Even social media, our smartphones, right? There's always something for your brain to hyper focus on. And even still, I have clients that tell me that they'll be scrolling on their phone while eating at the same time. So, it's these things that are we self adapt, right? But if we go back, like every hour already has a job in our life, right? Like you have work, then you have this, then you have kids, or you have your dog or your animal, or even rest is a job, right? You're supposed to track it and it's supposed to give you data to optimize. And so when real empty time shows up, which is why I talk a lot about the skill of boredom, right? The skill of being bored, the skill of being able to sit in stillness. And that is actually a skill because you need to build anchors that you can anchor that you can anchor yourself in the stillness. You need these psychic anchors to be able to withstand what I'm talking about now, which is the brain's kind of training to need something to hyper focus on. And what happens here is that when the space comes and there's no real emergency, the food is the thing that we hyper focus on, right? At first, maybe it could be like the scrolling, but eventually we kind of adapt to the scrolling and we need like a drug, right? Like we need more, we need more of something to make us go back to that state of feeling calm, right? Of feeling like anchored. So fixing the problems was that before. Now it's the food noise comes when that's not there.
You've built a good life. From the outside, it looks like you have it all together. You eat clean, you work hard, you take care of everyone. But there's this one area that still feels impossible to master, and that is food. You can eat perfectly all day and still end up in the kitchen at night wondering why you keep doing this. You promise yourself you'll start fresh tomorrow, and I know you mean it every single time. But the cycle, it always finds its way back, especially when you're stressed, when you're overwhelmed, or when you're just tired of being the one that's holding it all together. And I get it because I lived that way for years. And what I learned is this. The problem, it was never about food. It was the pressure underneath it, the perfectionism, the self-doubt, the part of me that never felt safe and secure to just be me. And that's why I created the sober eating sequence. It's a proven 3-phase method that rewires the emotional patterns and the belief systems driving overeating so you can relax, trust yourself around food, and release weight completely naturally, without force and without obsession. Because when your body feels secure, it lets go. The cravings quiet, the self-punishment, it softens, and food, it stops being the thing that you have to fix. This is not another plan. This isn't another rule book. It's a revolutionary transformation for your nervous system, for your body, and for your identity. So join the sober eating movement today.
And the food noise comes because that is the place that your nervous system knows the best, especially because that was the coping mechanism before. So it's just going to sort of revert back to that. This isn't something that's abnormal because, our brain does something sneaky with calm, right? Like most of us are people that have spent years bracing ourselves for the worst case scenario, right? Like prepare for the worst, hope for the best. But a lot of us forget about the hope for the best part and just prepare for the worst, right? So real calm and quiet can actually feel very strange. I know this very firsthand. I still deal with this, right? Like I have to actively engage with my psychic anchors. And these are things that I teach in my programs in order to keep myself in a place of inner steadiness so that I don't get pulled into these either like overeating behaviors or these feelings of confusion about why I'm thinking about food all the time, right? Because at the end of the day, I understand that calm isn't something that's natural to my nervous system. And I've had to teach my nervous system how to be good and how to feel good and safe and trust calm. Even though we're all saying that we go on these retreats to try to find calm and find this, the truth of the matter is that calm and feeling good and good stuff doesn't always feel good to our nervous systems right away, because that's not how we've been trained. Right? I talk a lot about attachment theory in my courses, where we talk a lot about like anxious attachment and avoidant attachment, and how attachment theory influences and impacts the way that your nervous system adapts to being able to deal with good things happening, because that's such an important factor. And when calm feels off, your brain is going to do what it does, which is, check on it. And food noise and food and obsessing over food or focusing on food is a really fast and comfortable and familiar way to check on a feeling without having to really explore what's going on, right? That's why the food noise comes back sometimes so quickly, because it's just almost like automatic. There's something else also that I think is really important to just bring up. Sometimes when women, and men too, but mostly women, listen to this podcast, I believe, so I'm going to say women, but people, sometimes when the food noise has been quiet for a while, you get comfortable with that being your new identity, right? Like, I don't have food noise anymore. And you sort of trust that that you're in control, right? Because a lot of us, that's what we're really looking for, is to just feel like we have control. Your identity is sort of starting to develop around being someone that's quote unquote past this type of thing, past having food noise. So when the food noise does come back, even if it's for a short amount of time, it doesn't just feel frustrating or an annoying thing that's there. It can actually make you question yourself, and it can make you distrust, right? Like it can create an erosion of trust, like this new version of yourself that you have gotten comfortable with and, isn't real, right? Like that. And that's a scary place, right? Like you've become accustomed to a way of being, and then all of a sudden something that you thought was in the past comes back. And that's like could be existentially scary. So the question that you want to ask is not necessarily, how do I stop the food noise, right? Like, how do I make the food noise go away again? Because that question takes you back to like an old way, right? It's kind of like, it's an externally motivated way, right? It's basically being like, a lot of times they'll just be, tightening everything back up again. Or maybe it's like, I got to go on a GLP-1 again. Let me go back to things that I did before. But the food noise that's coming this time is not the same. The food noise isn't here because of the same trigger than the first time, right? The first time it might have been a response to trauma, to stress, to unprocessed things. But now now it's different. Like it could be doing a different job, right? So it needs a different solution, right? So instead of saying, how do I make the food noise quiet? What I really want you asking yourself is like, what just opened up in my life? What space did I just get in my life? And, have I filled that space with anything yet? Not to say that that's the next step, but like, just acknowledge the space. And that is actually an extremely calming thing to do, right? Like to just acknowledge the space. Now, how to anchor yourself in this space, that is a skill, like I said. And, please, the invisible weight detox that I have on my website, that program specifically is about creating these anchors for this phase so that you can become, your own emotional anchor, so that you can have a stable foundation, so that you can continue going forward, in your journey in a really healthy and supportive and self-respectful way, especially if you want to lose weight as well. So, go there if that's, and join that program. I would love to have you in that. But that's really the question that I want you, to ask yourself, because I think about, the woman who's an empty nester, right? And the house is quiet in a way that it's never been quiet before. And, people will name empty nest syndrome, but they don't always talk about, the feelings, right? The sadness of it, right? And how food noise can show up in that time, right? And it's not necessarily because like she's sad, that's not it, but because a big part of her attention, a big part of where she placed her energy, her attention, the focus that had a job for, however many years, 20 years, that job is just now gone, right? And that energy, that, that psychic energy is looking for something to do at, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 3:30 in the afternoon when she used to pick her kids up from school. And that's when the food noise comes, right? Or someone who had a goal, right? It's often why when people hit their weight goals, food noise comes back, right? Especially if they're on diets and stuff, right? Because your attention was focused on the goal, so whatever that goal is, weight loss, it could be, but it could be like, a work thing, like you're working towards mergers and acquisitions and you're closing a deal, something that you've been working towards. And what did it do? Like it gave you purpose. It filled your days. And a lot of times food noise fills the space of something that used to give you purpose. And now that purpose energy, that place where you used to put your behavior, that container is gone, right? That's why you want to build you want to build all this stuff inside so that you can always go inside yourself and get the feeling that you want. And oftentimes, when food noise comes back, it's really just a signal and a sign that that's what's going on, right? That's what's really happening. Because food noise isn't really showing up. It's not a sign that things are going wrong, that, your progress is ruined, that you're going backwards, that you're backtracking. It's just quick, right? It's really just, it's quick. It's familiar. It's automatic. It's patterned, right? It's the first thing that shows up when there's empty space and there's nothing really there yet. And so it's really a message. The point of this episode is really just to illuminate this for you and to give you just a shift in perspective. If you're in an experience in your life or you're in a season in your life where the food noise is starting to come back, to just give you a different perspective on that, right? Nothing doesn't have to be wrong, right? Nothing has to be, you're not going backwards. All right. So that is all that I have for you today. And I'm so glad that you hopefully listened to the end of this episode. And like I said, if you want actual how-tos for how to develop the skills to bring this stuff into your life, please go to the website and click on, the Invisible Weight Detox, the Sober Eating Sequence. These all are amazing resources and tools and programs to help you just create this, this internal anchoring within yourself so that you can feel in control. And if you are enjoying this podcast on Spotify, on Apple, on YouTube, please subscribe. Please rate us 5 stars, leave us a written review, sharing your experience with the podcast. That really helps us get found on these platforms. And share this episode with anybody who you feel might benefit from it. And until next time, I'm Alana, and thank you for listening to Emotional Eating Unwrapped.